Hi, this is Daniel Miller. I work with NASCO, the North American Students of Cooperation, and we're going to keep talking a bit about Fair Housing Act and how it applies to your co-ops. And right now I want to talk a little bit about what it is that people mean by discrimination in the law. So we talked about who it is that's protected from discrimination for what reasons, but now I want to talk a little bit about what discrimination means for the law. So what is discrimination? Some of this is obvious, so refusing to offer somebody housing based on a protected class or to negotiate over housing. So, because of your religion, I won't let you live here, or falsely denying that the housing is available. This one's really common, so people will go to a meeting and be told that the room isn't available anymore. In co-ops, this is less common, but in the world of private non-co-op rental housing, this is very common. So they'd go to the rental office and be told that the unit is already taken. Offering housing on different terms than what another person would be offered. This one's also pretty common. So, we're going to charge you an extra deposit because you have children, or we're going to require you to sign a longer lease than other people might sign. A lot of this you'll hear through this presentation is going to be about the Fair Housing Act is asking that you treat people consistently from one person to another, and so if you start treating people differently based on one of these protected classes, that's going to be a red flag. So also providing different housing based on a protected class. So you're a person who has a disability, you can only live in this room over here, we won't allow you to live in other rooms. Or you're a person who has a child, you can only live in this room. So refusing to let somebody access real estate listings. I mention this because it's in the law. It's less relevant to co-ops, but what is relevant to co-ops is that you should make sure that you show somebody all of the different rooms that are available so that somebody can't feel like you had deliberately steered them to look at only certain rooms. And then also pressuring or forcing somebody to sell or lease their house for profit. So we'll talk about that as blockbusting. Probably this is something that your co-op isn't doing, but it is something that in the private real estate world is common. So what also counts as discrimination? So I mentioned families with children living in a certain area, or persons who are disabled living in a certain area, or only showing certain units. One of the things that's useful if you're dealing with somebody who's got children, somebody who's dealing with a disability, somebody who might have needs that are different from yours, and they're applying to live at the co-op, one thing to think about is that that person who's applying, they are going to be the best judge of their needs for housing. And so you get yourself into trouble if you start assuming what that person's needs are. And so if that means you're assuming what their ability dictates about where they live in the house, or assuming what it is that a person with children might need within the house, then that's something that's going to be an issue. And you're going to want to make sure to show them all of the different options and let them decide what is the best fit for them. Another thing that counts as discrimination is discriminatory advertising. This is something, advertising can never be discriminatory, even for private individuals, even if you have nothing to do with providing housing to the public under the Fair Housing Act. So, for example, you may be familiar with Craigslist listings for housing, and somebody could just say, I live in an apartment and I have a spare bedroom and I'm looking for a housemate. And if they said something discriminatory, if they expressed a racial preference or a religious preference for their housemates, then even though this law doesn't apply to them as a private individual, they still can't publish those discriminatory ads. So that's why Craigslist and other sites like that have that button to flag inappropriate or discriminatory ads so that those advertisers can not get sued for publishing discriminatory advertisements. So the ads can't express a preference based on a protected class, like female applicants preferred. That would be illegal. And certainly if you said something in your ads about preferring people of a certain racial background, religious background, nationality, those would all be illegal. Ads also can't use imagery or language that would discourage somebody from applying based on a protected class. So if you've seen those sort of corporate advertisements that feel a little phony because they have somebody from every possible background staged together in the photo, well, that's why they make those photos. Because if they had a photo of an entirely, say, white group of people, then it could be argued that they are trying to be limiting or discouraging in who would come and apply to the co-op by having a group of people that explicitly excludes others from that picture. So ads should generally avoid images of specific people and avoid language that assumes how members might use the facilities in the co-op, because what you're really saying is, you know, we know how it is that you're going to use this space, and really the person who's coming in and trying to move into the co-op, they're going to have their own sense of how they want to use that space, and you're going to want to make sure that that's open to them. Now, a quick note, I mentioned that you can't have a preference that you're expressing in your advertisement, but it's perfectly okay to do outreach. So it would be fine to do outreach and encourage women to apply to the co-op, for example, if you were saying, we have fewer female identified people living here, and we recognize that that's a situation that might be a problem. So it's not okay to say women housemates preferred or women only, but it is okay to say we encourage women to apply, or we strive to have a gender balance or to be inclusive. It's okay to reach out to groups that may not be represented in the co-op because maybe they aren't aware of it. So you might go to a specific club or some other area where there might be people who are not represented in your co-op that you have reason to think would see the advertisement if you put it in that place. So what isn't discrimination? And this is important because you may find that people feel defensive or frustrated and start throwing around accusations of discrimination, and you want to make sure that people understand what is and is not discrimination as far as the Fair Housing Act goes, so that everybody involved can make a responsible decision and feel comfortable that they're doing the right thing. So rejecting an applicant who does not meet legal membership requirements is not discrimination. If you're a student-only co-op and somebody who's a non-student applies to move in and you reject them, that's fine. You're not discriminating against somebody for some specific reason prohibited by the Fair Housing Act. You're saying we're housing that exists only for students of this educational institution, and you aren't a student of that institution. Some other co-ops might say, you know, we require people to do 8 hours per week of labor around the co-op, and you've said that you don't have that sort of time. We require people to come to our meetings, and you said that you don't want to come to meetings. Or for that matter, you had somebody apply who said they might have a hard time paying rent. Those are all legitimate reasons that you can decide not to accept an application. Some other things that aren't discrimination are evicting a member for not paying their rent or meeting other requirements expected of all the members. And that expected of all the members is important. So if you have a member who is refusing to do their labor, is not showing up for meetings, is acting in ways that are threatening to other members where that's prohibited by your lease or by your policies. If you have reasons like that where somebody isn't living up to their requirements as a member, it's perfectly legitimate to evict that person or to ask them to leave. The thing that's important is that you do this consistently for everybody, for all the members. So if you have some members who hardly ever do their labor at the co-op, and they are not being asked to leave, whereas somebody over here is being asked to leave for that same reason, then you're going to find yourself in trouble. One of the things that you should be aware of is that housing discrimination very rarely comes out and says, this is what we're trying to do, we want to be discriminatory. It's much more common, even when people are being deliberately discriminatory, for that to hide behind some sort of fig leaf. So, oh, you didn't meet this obscure term of our lease, and that's why we're kicking you out. Well, that makes sense if they're the only ones who didn't meet that obscure term of the lease. Once you have other people who are doing the same thing and are being treated differently, then you come back to that issue of treating people differently. So if somebody accused you of acting in a discriminatory way, you would need to be able to show how that's not the case. And so if you said, this person was stealing from other members, or this person was unable to pay their rent, and that's why we're kicking them out, then that's a really clean argument to make if they're the only person who wasn't paying rent, and so you ask them to leave. But if you say, we asked this person to leave because they don't pay rent, and 5 other people are also not paying rent, but are not being treated the same way, it's very difficult to make that argument in a court or in front of a human rights commission or whatever local organization deals with fair housing complaints. So something else that's a really sensitive issue that might come up, but again is not a form of discrimination, is if you have members who aren't following the co-op's policies, that person may be unpopular in other ways as a member of the co-op. So you want to make sure that you're separating out the issue of the problems that are arising with this member within the co-op and how they are or are not participating as a member, versus the level of unpopularity that they may be experiencing. So a person who doesn't do their labor, a person who doesn't show up for meetings, a person who treats others disrespectfully or ignores concerns that are brought up, there's a very good chance that they're going to be at the center of conflicts in other ways as well. But you want to be able to separate those things out and make sure that you're looking at this cleanly from one person to another. Something that's especially tricky and very sensitive is the issue of evicting somebody who's a threat to themselves or to others. So in basically every state, and state by state or even city by city, eviction and landlord-tenant law is going to look different. But one thing to be aware of is that essentially every jurisdiction is going to say that somebody who is threatening harm to others or threatening harm to themselves, or who has a history of doing harm to others or themselves, evicting that person is not a form of discrimination. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that might interact with, say, mental health issues or other disability issues later on. But for right now, just be aware that you should separate out somebody's behavior from their condition. And so if somebody is behaving in a way that is threatening, they may not be in a great place right now, but that doesn't mean that it's appropriate for them to be threatening others. And you should also just be aware that the co-op may be able to intervene and be compassionate and help that person get to a better place, but may not. And so the co-op doesn't need to have an obligation to help address those issues. It's perfectly legal to have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to threats of violence or violence done to others, and particularly also threats done to somebody might do to themselves. That's a situation where the co-op may not be able to support them in the way that they need once they start making these threats. Some things that are sort of a gray area for discrimination. You should, again, be very careful to apply your lease requirements and all of your co-op's policies consistently for all members. I'll keep mentioning this. It's very important. It's a thing that co-ops accidentally back into pretty regularly, and it's not a thing that people do intentionally, but the members that are at the center of problems or who have a more difficult time meeting their requirements, you know, their issues are going to be more visible than other folks. So you really want to be diligent and make sure before you start trying to take an action to ask somebody to leave or to deny somebody membership in your co-op, you really want to look carefully and make sure that you have a clear line of reasoning for why you're asking this person to leave or why you're not accepting this person's application, and you want to make sure to look across the co-op at other members to make sure that this same issue doesn't come up somewhere else.